chilly evening in a small American town called Willow Springs. The sun was setting beyond the hills, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. The streets were calm, but the air carried the faint sound of sirens from a nearby hospital. Inside that hospital worked a young nurse named Clara Monroe, a gentle, compassionate woman in her late 20s, known by everyone for her warm smile and caring hands. Clara had always believed that healing people was more than a job. It was her calling. She had no husband, no child, no one waiting for her at home. Her life revolved around her patients. Every evening, after her shift, she'd sit by the hospital window, sipping a cup of coffee, watching the soldiers who came back from the war with wounds deeper than the skin could show. That evening, as the emergency ward buzzed with activity, the doors flew open. 2 paramedics rushed in, carrying a stretcher. On it lay a young soldier, blood seeping through his uniform, his face pale and tired, his eyes barely open. "Gunshot wound to the chest," one of the medics shouted. "Name's Ethan Cole, Marine Corps." Clara's heart jumped. She had seen many wounded men before, but something about this one felt different. She rushed forward, gloved her hands, and began working alongside the doctors. Ethan was unconscious, his breathing shallow, his pulse weak. Clara's calm voice guided the chaos. She handed instruments, stopped the bleeding, and whispered softly even though he couldn't hear. "You're going to be okay? You'll see the sunrise again," she murmured. After hours of surgery, Ethan was finally stabilized. The doctors left, but Clara stayed. She watched him sleep, his chest wrapped in white bandages, his lips dry, his hand trembling slightly even in rest. There was something hauntingly peaceful about his face, the face of a man who had seen too much and survived. Days turned into weeks. Ethan remained in recovery, and Clara was assigned as his primary nurse. Every morning, she'd walk into his room with a soft smile. "Good morning, soldier," she'd say gently. Ethan would grin weakly. "Morning, angel." At first, he said it jokingly, but soon it became natural. They talked about everything: his time in the desert, the comrades he lost, the nightmares that woke him up at night. Clara listened, sometimes holding his hand when words failed. Slowly, she became more than a nurse. She became his comfort, his peace. One evening, after the hospital lights dimmed, Ethan couldn't sleep. The pain in his chest throbbed, but his heart ached more. Clara was sitting by his side, reading a book quietly. "Clara," he said softly. She looked up. "Yes? Why are you always so kind to people like me? You don't even know us." Clara smiled sadly. "Because someone has to be. Because if I can bring a little light to someone in pain, maybe it makes this world a little less dark." Ethan stared at her for a long moment. He had seen cruelty, war, loss, but never this kind of gentle strength. That night, as he drifted to sleep, he whispered, "You're the reason I want to live again." Months passed. Ethan recovered enough to leave the hospital. On his last day, Clara helped him pack his few belongings. Neither of them wanted to say goodbye. At the entrance, Ethan hesitated. "Clara," he said, "if I walk away now, I might never forgive myself. I don't want to leave without knowing if there's a chance for us." Clara froze, her heart raced. She wanted to say yes, but fear stopped her. "Ethan, I'm just a nurse. You're a soldier with a whole life ahead. You deserve someone stronger." Ethan stepped closer, his voice steady. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." Her eyes filled with tears. She looked at him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Maybe someday, Ethan, when you're ready to stop fighting the world." And with that, he left. Months turned into a year. Clara went on with her life, but every time she passed the recovery ward, she thought of him, of his quiet smile, of his eyes that once looked at her like she was the only calm in his storm. She tried to move on, but love has a way of staying hidden inside the heart, waiting for the right time to bloom again. Then, one snowy night, everything changed. The hospital was unusually quiet. Clara was on night duty when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Excuse me, nurse. I'm looking for someone." She turned, and her heart stopped. Ethan stood there, tall, healthy, and smiling. He was wearing a black coat, a small scar still visible near his jaw, but his eyes, they were full of warmth. "Ethan," she gasped. He grinned. "I promised I'd come back when I stopped fighting the world. I think I've done that." Clara couldn't speak. She just walked toward him slowly, tears in her eyes. He took her hands gently. "I've been searching for peace, Clara, but I realized peace was with you all along." She laughed softly, trembling. "You didn't even send a letter." "I wanted to tell you in person," he said, "that I love you." The words hung in the air like music. She had waited so long to hear them, longer than she admitted to herself. Clara smiled, resting her forehead on his chest. "I love you too, Ethan." That night, as snowflakes fell outside the hospital window, they stood together, holding on to each other as if they'd been given a second chance at life. Time moved forward. They married quietly, in a small church by the river. No grand celebration, no fancy gowns, just two souls who had found light after years of pain. Clara continued nursing, and Ethan started working with veterans, helping them heal not just their wounds but their hearts. Sometimes at dusk, he'd sit beside her on the porch, watching the sunset and whisper, "You're my home, Clara." And she'd smile, resting her head on his shoulder, whispering back, "And you're my forever." The world around them may have changed, but their love remained the same. Calm, deep, and true. Please subscribe to Heartfelt Stories for more emotional tales coming your way. Life after marriage wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. Something Ethan and Clara had both prayed for in their darkest nights. Their small house sat near the edge of town, surrounded by tall oak trees that whispered whenever the wind passed through. Every morning, Clara would wake up early, make coffee, and hum softly while watching the sunrise through the kitchen window. Ethan loved those moments. He'd watch her from behind, her hair catching the soft morning light, and he'd think to himself that she was the reason he survived the war. He often said, "The world outside was full of noise, but you're my quiet." Their days were simple. Clara continued her shifts at the hospital, still known as the kind nurse who treated every patient like family. Ethan volunteered at a rehabilitation center for wounded veterans. He became a mentor, helping others rebuild their lives just as Clara helped rebuild his. Together, they were a beacon of hope, two souls who had seen pain and turned it into purpose. But, even in peaceful lives, storms can find their way in. It started one cold evening when Clara came home late from work. Ethan noticed her eyes looked tired, her smile weaker. "You okay, honey?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Just a long shift, that's all." But she wasn't telling the whole truth. A few weeks later, Clara fainted at work. The doctors ran tests and she was diagnosed with a mild heart condition. It wasn't life-threatening yet, but it meant she needed rest, something Clara was never good at. When Ethan heard the news, he was devastated. "You've spent your whole life saving others, Clara. Now it's time you let me take care of you." Clara smiled faintly. "I'm not used to being the one in the bed." From that day on, Ethan became her nurse, her protector, her everything. He cooked, cleaned, and made sure she took her medications on time. He read her stories in the evening, the same way she once sat by his bedside reading to him when he was wounded. Life had come full circle. But as months went by, Clara began to feel guilty. She saw how hard Ethan worked, and one night she said softly, "Ethan, I feel like I'm holding you back. You could be doing so much more." Ethan laughed gently and kissed her forehead. "You're not holding me back, Clara. You're the reason I move forward." Her eyes glistened. "You always know what to say." "Because I've lived without you before," he whispered, "and I never want to feel that again." Years passed. Clara's health stabilized and life returned to its sweet rhythm. Every Sunday, they'd take a walk down by the river, the same one where they got married. Sometimes, they'd sit in silence, just holding hands, letting the wind carry their thoughts. One summer afternoon, a young woman approached them at the riverside. She looked familiar, bright eyes, curly hair, and a shy smile. "Excuse me," she said, "are you Nurse Monroe?" Clara nodded. "I was. Now it's Mrs. Cole." The young woman smiled wider. "You probably don't remember me. You took care of my brother years ago. After that accident, you saved his life." Clara's eyes softened. "I do remember you. You used to bring him those little toy cars." "Yes," the girl laughed. "He's doing great now, studying medicine, because he said you inspired him." Ethan looked at Clara proudly. "You've changed so many lives, love." Clara smiled, tears forming. "So have you, Ethan. You just don't realize it. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how fragile life was. Clara noticed and asked softly, "What's on your mind?" He took her hand. "I keep thinking, what if we'd never met? What if that day at the hospital never happened?" Clara squeezed his fingers. "Then maybe you wouldn't have healed, and maybe I wouldn't have learned what love really means." He smiled faintly. "You think it was fate?" "No," she whispered. "I think it was grace." Years went by and their love deepened. They grew older together, wrinkles replacing scars, laughter replacing silence. They still danced in their living room when old love songs played on the radio. Ethan would hold her close and say, "You're still my angel." And Clara would laugh, replying, "And you're still my soldier." But life, as gentle as it seemed, had one more test waiting. One morning, Clara didn't wake up as early as usual. Ethan found her still in bed, breathing softly, her hand resting on her chest. He sat beside her, brushing her hair back. She opened her eyes and smiled. She whispered, "Hey, yourself," he said softly. "You scared me." She chuckled faintly. "Just tired. I dreamt of the hospital again, of the day we met." He smiled sadly. "You never stop thinking about that day, do you?" "It's the day my heart started beating differently," she whispered. That evening, she asked Ethan to take her to the river one last time. They sat on a wooden bench, watching the golden sunset reflect on the water. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "Promise me something," she said softly. "Anything. When I'm gone someday, don't be sad for too long. Tell our story to someone who needs hope. Tell them love heals, even when life hurts." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "Don't talk like that, Clara." She smiled faintly. "I'm not saying goodbye, just a reminder." They stayed there until the stars came out, holding hands as the night grew colder. Clara lived for 2 more beautiful years. When she finally passed away, it was in her sleep in the same bed where Ethan once recovered years ago. On her bedside table, there was a note that read, "You healed me more than any medicine ever could. Love always, Clara." Ethan sat beside her, tears streaming down his face, but his heart felt strangely peaceful. Because she had kept her promise, she had filled his life with light. Months later, Ethan started writing a book titled The Nurse and the Wounded Soldier. It became a story that touched thousands of hearts, a story about love, loss, and healing. And every time he told it, he began the same way. "I was a man who thought war had taken everything from me, until I met a nurse who taught me that love could rebuild even the most broken soul." He never remarried. Every evening he still went to the river, watching the sunset alone, but never lonely. Because in every soft wind, every fading light, he felt her presence beside him. And whenever someone asked, "Do you still miss her?" he would smile gently and say, "No," because she never really left. After Clara's passing, Ethan's world felt quieter than ever before. The walls of their little house carried echoes of laughter and memories that both comforted and haunted him. Every corner reminded him of her, the way she'd hum softly while cooking, the smell of her favorite jasmine perfume, the gentle touch of her hands when she'd adjust his collar before he left the house. For days, Ethan barely spoke to anyone. He sat on their porch, staring at the trees swaying in the wind, lost in thought. Friends and neighbors came by, leaving food, flowers, and kind words, but none of it filled the emptiness Clara left behind. One evening, as he sat in silence, Ethan noticed Clara's old journal on the coffee table, a small, leather-bound book she used to write in every night. Her handwriting danced across the pages, soft and neat. He began to read. Today, Ethan smiled again. "It's strange. I used to think healing meant saving lives, but now I know healing is when 2 broken hearts find peace in each other." Ethan closed the journal, tears streaming down his face. He realized then what Clara had meant when she told him to tell our story. She wanted the world to know that love could mend even the deepest scars. That night, Ethan sat down at his old wooden desk, opened a blank notebook, and began to write. He wrote about the battlefield, about the cold nights when he thought he'd never make it home, about the nurse who refused to let him give up. He wrote about how her smile became his reason to fight again. Please, if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and Give this video a thumbs up for more interesting stories coming your way.